If you're looking to get one of the new Big Navi RDNA 2 GPUs from AMD, I'm going to tell you don't buy the RX 6800. I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you the GPU that you should buy. Let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Remember to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. It makes me happy. Subscribe if you like content like this. Hit that notification bell. So today, let's talk a little bit more about AMD's RDNA 2 Big Navi GPUs. And you heard me right, the RX 6800, don't buy that one. I'm going to tell you exactly why, and here are a few of the major reasons. Now, this GPU, along with the 6800 XT, will be launching on November 18th, and coming in December will be the 6900 XT, but you probably shouldn't get that one either. So, let me tell you a few reasons why you don't want the 6800 and which GPU you should get. The number one reason will be the price to performance value that you're paying for this GPU. The RX 6800, in my opinion, just isn't worth it, and I'm going to tell you why. The 6800 XT is the GPU that you should get. This is going to come in at $649 as opposed to $579 for the 6800. Now, you may be thinking the RTX 3070 is $499, the RX 6800 $579, right in the middle, and that $649, the RX 6800 XT. Is it worth that difference between $579 and $650? I absolutely think yes. Judged on the benchmarks that AMD has shown us, it's not just a small incremental bump. The 6800 XT seems to be on a whole different performance level than the RX 6800. Now, I believe this performance difference is very important for keeping the GPU competing at peak levels versus the RTX 3080, which has an MSRP of $699. One of the primary factors here, even though we do have 16 gigabytes of VRAM across the board on all three AMD GPUs, as opposed to only 10 gigabyte on the 3080 and 24 on the 3090, the VRAM that's available on the AMD GPUs is going to be the slower, older GDDR6 as opposed to GDDR6X on the 3080 and 3090. Now, having said this, that's why I think you need as much of a performance bump as possible to make up in any of those differences in the VRAM. That's why the 6800 XT, even though they have the same amount of VRAM as the 6800, the faster overall performance just helps put it in a much better sweet spot. And at the end of the day, as we mentioned, the price to performance ratio between the 6800 and 6800 XT leaves me a little bit scratching my head. It's a small difference for a much larger performance gain. I don't know why they priced it so close. For example, I really think the 6800 should have been maybe like a 6700 and then leave the 6800 XT alone instead of putting them in the same category. You would think there's a much closer performance relationship between both. But realistically, looking at the AMD provided benchmarks, the difference seems to indicate a different level of GPU, much like the 6800 XT might be different from the 6900 XT. So I believe the 6800 should have probably been a 6700, and it should have been priced probably like the RTX 3070 at around $499. Now, what is AMD's reasoning for pricing this GPU and calling it a 6800 at $579 when we have the 3070 that's much cheaper? Now, to be fair, in the benchmarks shown by AMD, the 6800 does seem to perform better versus the 2080 Ti in general than the 3070 does. But even having said that, even if it is technically performing better for the most part than the 3070, I don't think AMD really I don't think on the GPU side, AMD has built up enough consumer trust where they can really price these GPUs for a lot more than Nvidia if they really wanted to stay competitive with the 6800. Even if it performs better than the 3070, they really should have priced it like the 3070 because a lot of people, believe it or not, still prefer Nvidia. Nvidia has been the dominant player for the last several years on the more high-end GPU market, and while it's great AMD stepping into the fray and really being competitive, Before people pay more for even a little bit more performance, they really have to prove themselves like they've done successfully in the CPU space with Ryzen against Intel. So that's why I think the 6800 is just too expensive. That's why I think you should avoid it, don't get it, and you should go for the 6800 XT. For a little bump in price, you're getting a lot better performance, a lot better GPU. You're getting a GPU that's pretty much running neck and neck with a $699 RTX 3080. It's just a considerably better value proposition, and in this case, AMD named it and priced it correctly. Right beneath the 3080, it's performing as good in a lot of games, even a little better in some, than the RTX 3080, but for $50 less. Now, that's why the 6800 to me doesn't make as much sense, because yes, it does perform a good margin better than the 3070 against the 2080 Ti, but it's priced at $80 more, and really AMD still is not the premium offering on the market. I think they really have to prove their drivers, their hardware reliability, maybe for the next year or two before they can price these GPUs at a higher price. Not to mention that pricing it so much above the 3070 brings it too close to the 6800 XT, which just does not make it a very good value. So, having analyzed the performance compared to the price, unfortunately, this is what I think is probably going to end up happening. There have been some reports that the stock levels for the 6800 XT specifically, but also for the 6800, certainly are going to be very limited. This came out from an AMD partner in Europe, Asus. They said that the stock levels were certainly going to sell out within minutes, specifically talking about the 6800 XT. So, this is where I think it's going to present a conundrum that we're having in the market right now. People can't choose the exact GPU that they want just because they're not available. For example, if somebody wanted an RTX 3080, maybe they wanted the Founders Edition. Well, they couldn't find that, so maybe they had to get the only one that they were able to find, be it MSI or Zotac or something like that. So I think the same thing most likely will happen with these RX 6800 GPUs. The 6800 XT, obviously being the better price to performance GPU, it's really at the sweet spot. I think those are going to sell out instantly. And of course, since the 6800 is technically cheaper, it's probably going to be more mass produced, therefore available in greater quantities. And unfortunately, I think most people are going to end up buying that GPU anyway, even though in terms of performance, it's inferior to the 6800 XT. But judging sort of from the high-end quality of the 6800 XT, it's certainly going to be a lot harder to get that GPU, leaving most people with no choice but to get the 6800. So when we say that the 6800 XT is the GPU to get, that's certainly in an ideal world where stock levels are a little bit more normalized. But if you don't have a choice at all, it's probably better to get a 6800 rather than not be able to find any of the new next generation GPUs, because we know that the 3070, 80, and 90 are really perpetually sold out. So even though it may make sense on paper for me to tell you not to get a 6800, hold off for the 6800 XT, in the real world, that may not really happen. You may just see more 6800s, and then if that's the case and you really can't get a 6800 XT or one of the Nvidia GPUs, and you certainly need a GPU, then the 6800, I mean, it's not like it's a terrible value. It's just not as good as the 6800 XT when you compare them side by side, but it still seems to be performing better than the 3070, so it certainly still is a very good GPU. So now, having said that, and we compared AMD to AMD, the 6800 XT, how does it really live up against an Nvidia GPU? Let's say if in the ideal world you saw the 3080 in stock next to a 6800 XT at their MSRP, $649 to $699, what would you do? Now, this can be answered maybe in a few ways. For example, if you're planning to pair it with the new Ryzen 5000 CPUs, I would say it might make more sense for you to get the 6800 XT, because you're going to be able to take advantage of the synergy and the new features that Ryzen has with RDNA 2. For example, unlocking more frames per second performance, unlocking more memory with like a click in BIOS according to AMD. So that's going to have great synergy. So if you're planning on getting one of these new Ryzen CPUs, and I recommend that you do, they're fantastic, I would say then yes, go for the 6800 XT. But if you're keeping the CPU that you have now, maybe it's a 10900K or maybe a previous generation Ryzen, you have no plans to upgrade, I would say that the 3080 still makes a lot of sense. Even though it's $50 more than the 6800 XT, there still are a lot of things that the Nvidia GPU likely will do better than the AMD GPU. First is ray tracing. Nvidia has been on ray tracing for much longer than AMD, so games are going to perform better. Nvidia has DLSS 2.0, which basically is going to give you better graphics and less of a performance penalty. So Nvidia really has these great technologies developed already. Nvidia also has a much better encoder for people that are using these GPUs as workstation GPUs. And lastly, but perhaps the most important, Nvidia has a pretty good track record with their hardware reliability as well as their software drivers. This is an area that AMD certainly has had issues in the past before, so it's possible going into a new system like the RDNA 2 GPUs, there may be some growing pains, there may be a lot of driver issues. That's what we had with the 5700 XT, and AMD certainly on average took longer to resolve those issues as opposed to Nvidia, which resolved the issues much faster. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Happy GPU hunting to everybody, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.